Professional.
There you go.
This meeting is being recorded by special censors of the Grey Swan Guild.
All right, we'll edit that off the top, perhaps, or maybe we'll leave it in. So for people that are watching this online and in now real life, we're going to do Atelier number 4 for Grey Swan Guild. It's called Tech Swans Applied. We've looked at some really interesting use cases and less about the use cases and more about some questions that we have about the technology that we're looking at and in the future. And so I've got Howard Fields and I have Rob Tyrie joining me on this Odyssey. You guys signed up early on in terms of being hosts for this one. We do have future ateliers where we're looking for future hosts as well. And before anybody brings it up, we did canvass a lot of people in the universe, and we had one of the regrets was a woman that was going to be on our panel. We try to make all of our panels gender balanced, and so we just missed this time, not out of malfeasance, but just the person had to express regrets at the last minute. So I wanted to head that off at the pass. So let's get into this, guys. And we always start with good news. I have been watching the Olympics at really weird hours of the night, watching sports I've never, ever seen before. Rugby I do love, and I love the fact that Fiji, a small little country, I spent some time there a while back. It's about 1 million people in the country, are now the world champions, not for a first time, but for a second time during the Olympics. And the interesting thing is back home, in a country that has about 1 million people, they have about 1,250 daily cases of COVID. So this is a bright news story in a place that sorely, sorely needs it. Rob, Howard, are you rugby fans? Are you aware of the story?
I had heard the story. I've been to Fiji. I can't imagine that there's 1 million people there. But no, this is cool. This is like the Jamaican bobsled team, right? I mean, this is the same kind of story.
Yeah, there should be a movie.
Rugby is a world sport. It's huge, and then in some respects, nice and spread out, distributed, like cricket and basketball are. So wonderful to see, and that's what we're here for, this emerging talent. And then the following question was, why are they successful at it?
Yeah, well, just looking at the people in the picture, you can tell they look like they're happy, but having seen some Fijian rugby games, they're a mean crew of people. They can get fast and they can get tough. And so that might be my simpleton guess. But anyway, we'll continue on. I'm sure Agustin, who I'm seeing in the screen, will talk about Uruguayan Olympic success, whether they've had any medals yet. I'm not too sure. I usually track Uruguayan things. When I see
our story with the Olympics is not so fancy. We only have 2 gold medals, 1924, 1928, first 2 World Cups of soccer. Then we have 1 silver in cycling on 2000 and probably a couple of bronzes. That's it.
Well, have faith, because I just saw that the Philippines won their first gold medal ever in the Olympics, which surprised me. I thought they've been going to the Olympics for about 100 years. I thought they might have caught one in boxing or something, but I think was it a weightlifter? Somebody won. So
think about the population of the Philippines is over 100 million people.
I know there's maybe a funding or a training formula gap there, perhaps, Rob. So we established this just a couple of days ago, but I was looking through analytics of the Guild and looked at the fact that we had about 5 times as many people from Silicon Valley than Chicago. And lo and behold, Chicago is about twice as big as San Francisco and Bay Area. So we're trying to rebalance that formula. So for anybody that's joined us today, our continuing mission till next Tuesday or Wednesday is to get some Windy Cityers into the Guild. The ones that are here are amazing and vocal and wonderful. We want more of them. So I learned in my research that Walt Disney was born in Chicago. A lot of architects have spent a lot of formative time in Chicago. Obviously, a lot of comedians have come out of Chicago. Anybody, Howard, Rob, of any really cool Chicagoans?
Of course, it's the home and birthplace of Wrigley's Spearmint Gum.
W.M. Wrigley, you're right. He would have been from there. Howard, I know
I lived there for a couple of years. So there you go.
That sounded like a first cityer talking down to a second cityer, but all right. So let's get into our topic. We don't want to waste people's time, and we do have some really fascinating stuff to talk about. Why this topic? First of all, I think things have changed versus the last 2 decades. It is now considered technology the biggest enabler of progress and innovation. We thought we'd cover it. 2, oftentimes when you look at people that talk about technology, well, you've got those SEO people over there, and you've got those AI people over there, and you've got those biogenetic people over there. We'd like to actually be the United Nations here and bring them all under one roof. We're fascinated with the novel as good guilders, so we're curious to know which ones have staying power. And we want to dive into some use cases and key applications today. And as mentioned, I looked at sensemakers. There was an option here to say no, but about 3/4 of us say we have an innate and interested view on technology. And so whether you're in the tech space, associated with the tech space, we're certainly mainly curious about the tech space. And my company, Future Proofing Next, does this study every couple of years, but we look at the top 30 technologies. So I went to Howard and Rob and said, let's look at some of these technologies and tear through some of them in terms of a more intimate way. So we built this 30 technology list based on 5 different ways to go about it. So there is some substance behind it. And here was our latest reboot that we just did 2 months ago. We're not going to go through all of these, obviously, but COVID and the pandemic certainly has affected some of these things, but it was designed to be a 10-year list of things. So I'm just going to rhyme off the first 5. Augmented intelligence, which I'll get to in a minute. Internet of Things, which is everything connected to the cloud and either moving or doing something of substance. Machine learning AI, which we've separated out as another AI component. Mobile internet, principally driven by 5G in the Western world. And cybersecurity trust proofing, which grew from something like 9th from 2 years ago to 5th now. We believe cybersecurity is going to be a big thing. We're not going to touch on it too much today. And the only 2 things on this list I would mention is everybody talks about AI, and pretty much, Rob and Howard, AI is in everything, right? Like, I can't think of a technology that isn't affected by AI. So we tried to tease some of AI out by turning number 1, augmented intelligence and how it gets along with humans. Number 3, machine learning, and just essentially any task that is 3 to 5 seconds or shorter. How does AI affect that? And then AI superintelligence, which comes in at 9th. And so I don't know if you guys have thoughts in terms of AI and its prevalence, and it is a buzzword for nearly everything when we talk about technology.
Well, I'd say that when Mark Andreessen from Netscape Frame and A to Z now, A to 16, said software ate the world, AI is going to eat the world, and AI will not just be software. There's already hardware implementations of artificial intelligence techniques and algorithms. It's a fascinating thing, but it's a big thing, emerging and connected and beyond exponential, at least increased multidimensional exponentiality.
Wonderful. And then Howard, any thoughts on either the list or just AI or anything in general?
Well, beyond AI, I mean, AI is obviously what you said is absolutely true, what you and Rob just said. But I kind of look at, 3 kind of base level contextual setting elements when you talk about technology and you talk about technology change. The first is that it's continuous, but we don't all experience it that way. Right, it's the old William Gibson quote that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, right?
Yep.
So as you pointed out, many of the technologies we're talking about today were driving change before the pandemic, but COVID was the litmus test, right? And it exposed just how fragile the processes that we have in place to use those technologies are. And in fact, still are. We haven't really fixed it, right? We now know how weak they are. Unfortunately, as we've talked in other calls, lots of senior executives want to return to normal. And that's a trap, right? It's a trap that's going to cost them dearly, because the savvy senior executives recognize that the environment is evolving continuously and ever faster now. And they're trying to figure out how to get the early warning systems in place so that they can either maintain or enhance their competitive position. So, they're having to look at longstanding assumptions and hidden biases to figure out where their processes need to be improved. And as we were talking last night, Sean, the example I look at currently is one where the rules are being rewritten. NASA used to build single-use rockets, and now Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos build reusable rockets. And that is a fundamental shift in product design and in how the technology is experienced. And it shows how sustainability actually is beginning to rewrite the rules. I'm sure there's going to be many other trends just like that one.
Well, it's interesting you brought up space too, right? Space didn't make the list. I think it's around 37, but just almost overnight, a whole bunch of, I guess what we would call rich guys have turned space into something that we've all found a lot more interesting. And it feels like I saw something from Scott Galloway this week that the collective amount of coverage of Bezos going into space rivals that of news coverage of global climate crisis. So there's maybe a rebalancing in order there, but certainly space got a lot more interesting in the last 6 months. And just a shout out to Agustin as well. Blockchain's there, and it shows some residue of its past. It says number 4. That's where it was 2 years ago. So it took a little bit of a bumpy ride over the last 2 years, not because it wasn't as important, but I think some of the other technologies kind of went through it, and this might have been during a low valuation phase of blockchain when we were going through this as well. So anyway, let's continue. We have a whole arsenal of different futurism and sense-making approaches available to us. We decided to take this one for the purposes of this topic today. It's called Cypher. I'm not too sure if people have heard of this, but Amy Webb, who's written a number of really, really interesting books around technology, came up with it. And essentially it stands for contradictions, inflections, practices, hacks, extremes, and rarities. The contradictions being what's really changed, what's shaken our belief. And there's been a lot of those over the last 18 months during the pandemic. What's a tipping point where it's like, whoa, now that Bezos wants to spend $2 billion with NASA, is that a seminal moment for space technology? Who knows? Practices, what's really, really new and a threat to whoever the incumbents are. Hacks, what are some of the things that we've looked at and said, whoa, this is totally interesting and probably not how the inventors intended on how to use it. Extremes, what's really pushing the limits and the boundaries of either what's possible in theory and practice. And then rarities, just anything strange and anomalous that we usually see probably on some type of weird blog or Reddit, and it's like, whoa, there's actually some potential there and people are sparking to it. So that's kind of what we looked at in terms of looking at some of these technologies. Rob, Howard, I don't know if you had been familiar with the approach before and whether or not it's a good lens to look at early signals to the future.
My take was it's pretty good on the technology side. It's a little tougher on the process side. As I was working through CX, I was trying to juxtapose some of the things from the process, because CX is more process than it is technology.
Yeah, each of the lenses are very abstract, I found. So it's a good tool. I've used some other things from the Future Institute. And I like the things that I like are the bottom 3 around hacks, extremes, and rarities, because it forces you to kind of get outside the box. But in trying to interact them, that's what I'm going to try and do, is to overlap some of them to see how you can work with them in triplets. But I like the model.
Yeah, I mean, I did
conclude that there was one missing. So I don't know how we fix this problem.
Yeah, jump in there. You had mentioned that to me last night, I think. What was the one that you wanted to have on the list?
Interactions, right? Because as you started to point out at the top end of this, AI is in everything. Well, as I started going through CX, I identified like 8 that they're all interdependent on each other. Mm-hmm. And so I think teasing that out would help people understand when they see a change in technology or a move forward in technology in one area, how it might impact, or what other areas it might impact as a result.
I think that's a really salient point. I mean,
I know Sean, when we were working on it, we were having as we were positioning things, is this inside that, or is this outside of that? Like, which came first, the crypto or the blockchain? And it's fascinating because I think as analysts, when we're, especially if you're a solutionist, you want to put this sort of hierarchical model together. And it's nice if you could, but I think that when you step out and you look inside, that it's not quite like a Russian doll, some of these technologies. It's more like the two mirrors. When you're looking in the two mirrors and they go inside each other, and there's an effect. Someone please find what the name of that effect is. And it's, as I look at sensors, for instance, or if you look at risk models, well, there's risk models that are inside risk models, and they're inside risk models, and they can have circular references. So not to set off a logic bomb, but that's the way I think about things, is one inside the other, and that can be interconnected. And if it's multidimensional, the world, the interconnection should be dependent on the context in which we are talking.
No, both really good points, and you're right. I think maybe the education we can provide for today, as well as to at least provide some heft and some definition behind some of these things, because I do think for people that, and I was this person a decade ago, I would have been on the periphery of technology and using technology as buzzwords. And my hope is we can float some assumptions and create some education for our audience today. So initially we had about 5 speakers that we're going to do this. We're going to explore 10 technologies. Since we have 3 speakers, we're going to go deep on 6 technologies. Please add your thoughts in the chat as we go along. We're going to have some time, hopefully at the end, to actually engage the group of live people that have joined us today. And so we're going to use this Cypher model to go through 6 different technologies. I'll cover off some of the augmented intelligence here. And remember, augmented intelligence is pretty much how is AI helping humans? And essentially, my prediction is, the biggest form of AI benefit over the next decade will be in this camp. How does it work alongside us as opposed to replace us or do some of the more menial tasks that we'd much rather not do, which has some employment kind of issues. It has a number of different balancing things on our side. So I'm going to share some examples, but I use the Cypher approach for this. Contradictions. It's interesting. We in North America have kind of a love-hate relationship with technology and the incursion of AI. We look at it from a bias standpoint. We've seen some of the more racist things that may be unintended, but have come out of early AI things. And we've certainly looked at it from a privacy standpoint. How much do we want people in the middle of our lives? And certainly there's some legislation in Canada that certainly challenges that. They almost want to treat the internet almost like TV. And there's obviously some challenges to that. So I'm going to share with you an example of that. I'm going to share with you an example of military use of AI and an inflection point. Imagine wars being created and not getting into the messiness of wars with human being and human sacrifice and loss, and maybe votes being lost or whatever based on that consequence, and more around having technology and AI deploy out to the battlefields, which has huge implications. Practices, we're going to talk about legal use of AI and the fact that we could see an entire profession of lawyers being wiped out by the use of AI. Hacks on a good side, looking at a handicap in the future. Is it really a handicap, or can we compensate for it or leverage it, in fact? So an example there, the end of reading potentially, and I hate that because I've spent all of July working on a book. I would hate to think that people aren't going to read the whole thing, but I'll share something of that. And creative people always go, well, that's great for those poor lawyers or that manufacturing person, but I'm creative. It will never touch me. I'm going to share with you an example that may challenge that assumption as well. So as I go through this, guys, maybe just a couple of quick comments on here. Blue Dot, Canadian company. And when you look at AI and transparency, China actually in the first few weeks of the pandemic denied anything was happening in Wuhan province. This was the first company to actually surface the fact, oh no, we've been pulsing out different things to hospitals around the world, and we've spotted this hot place in Wuhan. We don't know what it is necessarily, but and so certainly AI in a world of transparency. I wonder in the future whether or not governments, businesses can lie. right? Is it worth telling a lie anymore, given how AI works? Any thoughts on that one, guys? Making you think.
Well, see, I go to this is where I start marrying some of the technologies. So AI and human interaction and sensors, you're going to be able to hear it. You can already hear it in somebody's voice, right? If you have the right equipment, if somebody is lying, right? So embedding it in the internet more fully would get us to kind of the end of being able to run and hide and lie about things. But as we said last night, we're 20 years ahead of ourselves on something like that, at least.
Well, sometimes 20 years becomes 10 real quick. Certainly, we talk about lying. I've queued us up for this too. There is AI right now, and I'm trying to remember the name of the company that I ran across, but certainly it is in the business of spotting liars in the courtrooms. It can also do it in poker, which I'll be playing in about 4 hours, which concerns me to no end. And essentially, when it looked at the average human in a legal situation, 58% of a time that someone's lying in court, a human can accurately pick up on that deception. Do you want to know what percentage this tool is able to do it at?
I'm going to guess it's pretty high.
About 92%.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to go into kind of a capital punishment situation with an 8% error chance. But still, I mean, that says something, that technology is a much better read on lying than perhaps human-to-human contact, which has huge implications if you start to institutionalize some of that technology.
Taking that to the extreme, I am reminded, as Howard knows that we do, of a movie called Liar, Liar, and going through the proposition that someone wished that he could or was not able to tell anything but the truth. And what a world that would be if there were no white lies.
Yeah. And then, well, at some point, if we play this out, Rob, one thing I thought about this is, if I can use my AI to spot your lie, can I use my AI to fake a lie? And is it once again back to steroids versus steroid testers, and who's actually winning the game?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going here. I love this. Weiwei had a facing emotions app where essentially, if you're sight challenged or blind, you probably have a tough time picking up on the emotion around you. There's certainly a sense that you can probably pick up on the feel of a room, but there is emitted sounds that occur in this person's technology to actually know what's actually the reaction of what people are saying to you. So if I was certainly doing a keynote somewhere and I couldn't see people, this would be inordinately helpful. And so AI is able to interpret the sentiment of people that are around you and actually play it back to somebody who's blind. So I thought that was a great one. This one, Alexi, is in the business of creating legal memos on demand. So, remember that thing that you used to spend $600 on and say, I need some type of position from a junior level lawyer at your firm on this thing, and so I can send it over to somebody else. Well, guess what? Technology does that now, and it doesn't do it for $600. And certainly one of the implications on this is pretty much if you're a junior lawyer in any firm, I don't know if you guys have been around lawyers, but it's trying to find files, trying to find references. Every single Ally McBeal I've ever seen is like sending your lawyers out to actually find things or develop some very low-level kind of non-pivotal piece of information. Technology is now taking that out of the equation. And so it may cause a complete gap in lawyerdom where you have no junior lawyers anymore. Only you have senior lawyers, you have technology and the people that need to use them, which may create some issues in the future. 2 more ones around AI. Anybody remember this? Anybody know this?
Black Mirror.
Anybody a fan of Black Mirror?
Yeah, I remember this.
Remember Lacey? She spent her entire time trying to get up to 4.5, where all of a sudden key different benefits would happen in her life. She could live in better neighborhoods. She could have more financial things open up to her. And it was a great episode on Black Mirror about how much she just tried and associated with the right group of people and tried to do all the right things. And it turns out everything goes wrong and her social credit score rating went down to 1.8 and she was ruined in life. And we look at it and we think it's a joke. Well, guess what, guys? In China, this is happening as we speak, and it's using AI principally. And if you look at the social credit file of things below, it's taking these 10 different things. And right now it's basic, but certainly you can enhance it over time, where it's like both financial, some other basic info, are you on any blacklists of, either digital or other companies, a number of different things. And they are patching that into one score that says, you are a good person in China, you are a bad person in China, and opening up different benefits to different people. And the most alarming thing for me is, now granted, different cultural basis here, but if you look at the amount of support the Chinese population has for this, they do not see this as an incursion on their life. And the higher income that you go, the better it gets, which, I think there's some people that have been part of this crackdown recently that may want to rethink that, but certainly, a good 2/3 of the population of China think this is a pretty good thing. So those are my AI things. There's two other ones. Sorry. One, something called Summarize Bot, where essentially you want to summarize 300 pages of a book. You can get a summary through AI. And so for slow readers, and I am one of these people, there's a huge benefit here, but I think there's maybe some things lost in the subtext, but that's AI. And then finally, there are...
Sean,
Yep.
Just a couple things on the last two pieces of technology. I've done some thinking on this with a couple of colleagues. And the big thing here is this consensus ranking is a huge problem. I mean, this is what Google does, right? And this is how fake news gets proliferated. And so AI has to jump in here, get rid of the consensus ranking, and instead of using just page clicks, we need correlation. And that's where AI is going to make a big impact if someone implements it successfully.
Well, and that's it too, right? I mean, when it starts to get human contact, we love the simple answers to things at times, right? And I think some of the human factor may be driving this as well, where we want the one right number as opposed to what you're talking about, which makes entirely good sense to me. So the last couple things, because I know we have a number of other things to cover off here, and please add your own thoughts or different use cases or applications that you've seen that mine some of these areas or different areas. One was reading and Summarize Bot. The last one is called Amper. There are pop musicians right now that are using music defined by AI. And so, if we look at pop music, and we had a good conversation, I think both of us before we jumped on, really, there are different things about pop music that makes them rise up the charts. Not everything is based on this formula, but there's a good chunk of things in that formula. So in the future, do you look at music as something that is the human grind of trying to get out great songs? Or is it really good AI that knows what your ear wants to hear and what melody and what lyrics might make sense? And I know, Howard, you are a guitarist in your spare time. Maybe it's in your lead time. I'm not too sure, depending on the nature of your moment right now. But what do you think about this one?
Well, I'm a keyboard player, but I also have written music. And there are times when you are trying to figure out the right pattern for the right emotion. So it makes perfect sense to me that somebody would attack this problem. I brought the website up. I'll take a look at it over the weekend, and I'll tell you next time we talk what I think.
Well, and you may actually tell me a song that you really, really love in the near distant future, and then we'll realize it was written by Amper as well. So, yeah,
I mean, we were talking about earworms last night, right? Weren't we? Right, yep. And it's there is a structure to writing a summer hit, a summer pop hit that becomes an earworm. And there've been a number of articles on that over the last couple of years. So this makes sense. We'll see how mature the technology is.
Any thoughts in general, Rob, on AI in terms of use cases and where it's going and implications for all of us?
This one of the technologies is that because it's exponential in nature, we as humans will see that it will, for instance, at speed. What I have is an eye always looking for the phrase or the two words of superhuman or superhuman X, right? Once something hits superhuman X, something changes, whether it's superhuman X chess playing or Go playing. So we're seeing now more superhuman stuff. I'm watching the generative algorithms, the GTP3 algorithm from OpenAI. There's a number of competitors in that area. And this is the type of AI that creates things from other patterns and blends things. So I'm reminded carefully of some of the journalists who don't know a lot about exponential growth of complexity or this type of technology, but they're the journalists giving people warnings to future-proof their jobs. So if you've got a repetitive job or something that's easy or easy steps for you to do, they warn people that, well, your job's gonna be taken. There's some things within this form of AI where there are repeated patterns, like Howard was alluding to, where really fine art or writing or music is really repetitive patterns or the blending of two patterns into something amazing and new. And we'll find that what we considered some creative tasks that only humans could do are actually going to be done much better and much more efficiently by AI programs. So I'm watching that. Meanwhile, I'm just shifting left a lot, doing random things and dealing with very complicated things. I think that's where our human space lives. So if you find yourself repeating a pattern or going through something with cut and paste or saying, that's just like what I did 10 years ago, except it's really creative, watch out.
Yep. We had the same thing about the elemental nature of chatbots, and maybe not now, but hopefully within the next 3 or 5 years, it's like, okay, why has my Apple completely shut down now? And give me the answer as opposed to me having to search through 50 different forms to find it. We're going to move over to the second technology. That was my thought on augmented intelligence. Howard, you're an expert in the area of customer experience and how it marries up with technology. You've done this for decades. You used the Cypher model to go through CX technologies. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Okay, we didn't get to charts on mine, so you'll have to listen to the voice on this one. But again, we talked about the whole notion that a technology change happens, but it doesn't happen all at the same time for all of us. There are a couple of other key points to think about relative to CX as well. The speed of technology change can be deceiving. So we can showcase in a lab or in a controlled environment that we can do something. But before the average person has the ability to implement it, it usually takes a generation or more. Paul Sappho at the Institute for the Future used to say that we often overestimate the short-term impacts of a technology, or in this case, a process, and underestimate the long-term impacts. And so that applies to CX. And again, the other point I made earlier was that there are many of these other technologies that overlay it. It rarely is one technology changing everything by itself. It's usually in combination. And there's not only technologies in CX, or not only interdependencies on other technologies in CX, but also on people. There's a huge interdependency on people and their willingness and ability to adopt new capabilities, and how good the training is and how good the software is. So if we start applying that using the Cypher method, what I would say is what's changed, at least at the top performing companies, is the following. There's a recognition that companies can't solve customer needs within the traditional organizational silos anymore. Most of those projects fail for a variety of reasons. Usually the biggest is that there are supporting processes that have not been adjusted to support the pilot or the new process. What companies have chosen to rely on for the last few years is the customer journey programs. And they're using this to realign their organization around the customer, And they're seeing incredible improvements, advocacy improvements of 20 to 40 points in advocacy scores, or cost reductions of 50 to 20%, and revenue increases from 10 to 20%. There's some recent data from a state of the customer journey management and CX measurement report that came out of Boston Consulting Group that said that 68% of high performers have a dedicated role or team on customer journey management, and only 31% of the underperformers do. So there's getting to be a proof point that you have to cut across the organization. And at least for most of my career, that's never what you saw. You always saw everybody trying to do controlled experiments to prove it in one place before it spanned the organization. So that's kind of the contradictory piece of this. When I look at the inflection points here, what we started to hear over the last year or two is that looking at CX alone without looking at EX, or employee experience, was missing half the story, right? That if you didn't empower your people to be able to provide the right kind of customer experience, you would actually miss things in the process. And we've all experienced that on service calls when we get someone who's trained to read a script, right? And is not permitted even to break out of their script to be more efficient in helping us. Well, what's starting to happen now is we're looking beyond CX and EX, and we're looking at all the experiences. So we're adding things like the product experience and the service experience to the process. And we're beginning to think in terms of the overall human experience that gets created for everybody involved in the process. It's a growing focus on creating a more human experience. And I would put the question to everybody on this call. You know, we've had a lot of digital transformation, kind of force fed because of COVID over the last year and a half. Can anybody share an example of a firm that seems to be better aligned across these multiple types of experiences and produce a better or a better experience for you? Has anybody experienced that? Anybody have any examples?
Well, I would throw in right away, Howard, on a brand new kind of customer experience, but I think is the leading edge, and that would be Carvana in the States, where they've completely changed the used car buying experience and dropped out a dealership, dropped out online shopping, really dropped out dealing with a salesperson, an insurance person, a bank. They drive the car to your door that you want. You have 7 days to try it, and so on. And that's that, if I put my hat on from 20 years ago, would have been beyond science fiction. To have someone roll up your front door with a used car that you could just buy with your credit card like that.
Yeah, my own personal experience, I got a new lease earlier this year, and the experience in the dealership was changed because I think I was the first guy in the dealership in 2 weeks, the first potential customer. So they didn't play the usual games with me, right? Because they knew I had options like the one you just described for Carvana. It's not only changing for Carvana. I think perhaps other people have experienced this as well, but I see it changing the rest of the industry before it's finished. And Catherine, you mentioned in the chat that you think it'd be a small organization that'd be able to pull this off, and I couldn't agree with you more. Right? When there are fewer handoffs and more people wearing multiple hats, it's much easier to see where the breakage occurs or where the missed opportunities are occurring. In larger corporations where everybody has their blinders on and is working on optimizing their particular metric, it's a lot more difficult. But I think the answer here lies in getting the larger companies to sort this out and to be able to see discreetly what's going on. Anybody have any other examples? Okay, we'll move on. So the next element of the cipher is practices. And I kind of looked at that in terms of identifying where the problems still lie in this space. So for CX, if you get a bunch of CX people in a room or around, in a conference table or out to lunch or dinner, the number one problem you will hear is that they have limited engagement from their leadership team. And they have a lot of difficulty tying CX to the company's strategic objectives. I don't know if we have any CX professionals on the phone or on the call, but if we do, I'd love to see your opinion of that one in the chat. There are many others, right? Metrics are softer than the hardcore metrics we have in finance traditionally, so it's really hard to quantify ROI around CX. We already talked about the lack of holistic planning and the misalignment across silos, and how there's a need for more people to follow the journey mapping approach. There's also we get into my pet peeves, the deploying processes that are designed to make the company efficient at either the cost of efficiency for the customer or for the or at the cost of human interaction, actually. So we've all experienced telephone systems that tell us how long we're going to have to wait. And if we'd like to wait, we can stay on the phone. And if we don't want to wait, we can have a call back when it's our turn in the queue. That technology is not that expensive, yet most firms haven't implemented it. And one has to wonder why. How customer focused is that? Another big problem in this space that's really been driven by COVID. When there was nobody to call, everybody switched to digital self-help. And we saw how fragile those processes were. So, what companies quickly tried to do was get to chat bots and automated ticketing systems. And that's an ultimate efficiency play for them, right? At least somebody's there to answer the high level question. But generally when we call, chat bots usually end up saying, oh, I can't answer that. I'll create a ticket and you'll hear back from somebody in 3 hours or tomorrow or in 3 days. That remains a huge, huge problem. And it's not, it's degrading the human component of the interaction, which I think companies will see the error of along the way here and fix it. There's a lot of trouble providing consistent and exceptional customer experiences across channels. We may be able to master it in one, but particularly in the retail space and the B2C space, that remains a big problem. And also delivering personalization at scale would be another one that we still have trouble with today. So that's what we see as the problems with the practices. Looking next at the hacks. For the hacks, I looked at it two ways. Sometimes you may want to create a disincentive, right, for a customer. And there are plenty of stories we could share where companies have done that. But I think I'll spend my time on this one talking about where I see those intersections between CX and some of the other technologies, because I think that's the greatest insight here. So augmented intelligence, which Sean touched on, right? The ability to never ever having to open a user manual again, right? Because you're getting that information through an augmented intelligence feed. Big data is a second intersection with CX, particularly around text analytics and voice analytics. So that, Sean, you were talking about the facial analytics a little bit on the AI side. That all plays in here. Immersive media, certainly there'll be immersive sales demos and simulations and trials that we'll all eventually experience. In the IoT realm, there's retail sensors in every major store today that is tracking your navigation through the store, how long you spend time in front of a particular display. There's also smart shelving that will, basically do economic reorder quantity kinds of things. So that's another intersection. Mobile internet. Has everybody been through a store where you were in proximity to a store and you got a proximity-based promotion to your cell phone or to your watch? That's another intersection. On the superintelligence side, any of us who use software and that have questions about how to get something done, there's no reason why AI can't be put in the software to watch what you're doing and act like a teacher would and say, hey, you seem to be having problems with this. Why don't you take a look at this tutorial, right? So to get ahead of the problem. And then the last one I jotted down, we don't really have on our list, Sean. We may want to put it on for later, or maybe it's just lower on the list. It's the privacy one, right? And the personally identifiable information monetization, where we all get compensated for the value that our personal data creates. That's when we didn't put on this particular list. Going down to the end of the list, the rarities. Where I went to on that one was the rise of the meme stocks, right? The customers got tired of playing by Wall Street's rules, and they took their matters into their own hands with GameStop and AMC. And this is going to be, I think, a hand-to-hand combat kind of war for a while between Wall Street and these active young investors. We'll have to watch and see who the long-term winners are going to be. But that's a, again, that's a perspective, trying to use the cipher to look at this from a process perspective.
You know what dawns on me here, Howard, having you gone through all that and I'm curious to know if you can side on either one of the fence, because the easy answer, I guess, is both. But here, I'll go with the question. On CX specifically, when we look at technology, do we need more tech with the humans that are dealing with the space, or do we need more humanness in our tech? Like I'm Don, there's a teeter-totter here where both are important, but is one more essential than the other here?
Yeah, I think we need more humanness in the tech. Again, I think with this was another quote we talked about last night. It was the Microsoft quote that they used to say, first we make it practical. First we make it possible, then we make it practical. Right? And this is this whole notion that Paul Sappho was on, that it takes you can bring technology to the fore. I brought speech technology out in 1995, speech recognition for IBM. And I could demo it like an expert. I could make it look conversational. But it took 25 years before we had Siri and Alexa and some of the other ones that make it look conversational to the average public, right? And by the way, it's still not conversational. It's still very much rules-based. And that's 25 years that had to elapse. So, I think the technologists love to say, oh, you can do this and you can do that and you can do the other thing. Yeah, but it's not practical yet. Yeah. Or the compute power is not there yet. Or. So you have to get the usage scenarios figured out and be very holistic in how you measure the capability. My opinion.
Very interesting, Howard. All right, we're going to keep moving. I know we have this as a 75-minute one. I know we got 4 more technologies to go through, but thank you for that. Immersive media, and it's just this package of technologies, both VR and AR, and some people call it XR and MR, and 360 gets involved into this as well. I went straight to the use cases here. We talked about legal earlier, from how do you practice law. Imagine recreating a crime scene where you're using VR as your opportunity to completely relive the scene. Could you make guilty people innocent or innocent people guilty by use of better uses of technology? And similar to the O.J. Simpson trial, would better lawyers and better technology give you a better chance of getting off the hook from any crime? Just something to consider here. But my prediction is that all of the GameStop stuff that we saw and AMC stuff that caused some of my financial friends complete headaches, I see lawyers and legaldom having the same thing very shortly follow after them with some of the technology available to them. This was an incredible experience I had just 2 days ago, and I wanted to give it some profile. Thing called Verbella.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure if anybody been on there, but essentially it's Second Life with a practical use case. I was taken on a journey with, and here I am. I don't know if this looks like me. I tried to be a little bit dressier on the left-hand side there. I was a little bit limited in my accessories, but so Jean-Marc Frangos took me on a tour of Verbella, which it's crazy when you think that WeWork was capitalized at what? How many billions of dollars of SoftBank money went down the drain based on WeWork and the physical asset of sharing a space? Meanwhile, there's a company here, and I asked where they were based out of, and they wouldn't tell me because they're everywhere. They don't have a physical head office location, not surprisingly. But essentially, it was a rich, extraordinarily rich multimedia experience where Jean-Marc probably spends 2 hours a day in the space where he has meetings, he does it, and it takes the pressure off of Zoom. Like Zoom, we're all kind of measuring each other out. You can turn your picture on, you can turn it off, and it does create a much different experience. So when I looked at different use cases, Verbella for me was, wow, I might want to launch my book here. I might want to create a future Grey Swan Guild event, particularly in Verbella, and have some interesting implications there.
Yeah, I looked at that for my consulting business back in like February, and it was clearly Second Life, but in generation 3. It's great. You still can't get the visual cues you need, right?
But sometimes Howard, and it was an interesting insight Jean-Marc told me. It's like, if you spend 3 hours on Zoom, how do you feel? Like
you feel tired.
I'm exhausted, and I'm a slight extrovert. I feel bad for the introverts that might be even slight, Rob. But after 3 hours, it's tough. He was saying like people can spend a lot more time in the space just because you're not reading people or feel like you're being read. So I've found it an interesting piece there. I'm going to keep going. I know gyms, if you look at the financial health of an entire industry, gyms are on the way out, right? 60% of gyms may not come back from this pandemic. They were just, it was a tight business model that became much more difficult. And so we've seen things like Mirror and things turn up in your living room, Peloton. This was an interesting version of AR where it's like, wow, I run a lot. I don't like running, but if I had to run against a zombie or ahead of a zombie, I think I'd run a little bit harder. And so this is a great use of AI in terms of a use case that, they say Generation Z, about half of Generation Z will, in their adulthood, they get into the 30s and 40s, will be obese or technically obese. Imagine if they can use some of the technologies at play to actually not have that happen. This was an interesting one where it's like there is something missing when we work online with each other and see two-dimensional things. Imagine if we were looking at some technologies here today and we could tumble them and design them and play with them in a three-dimensional environment, which we suffer from with Zoom, right? It's very two-dimensional, even though we show up as 3D figures. Imagine what would happen with education, right? Or research in this case, where as much as people tell you, I want that thing over there, their eyes, their body impressions probably tell you something different. There is a huge misfactor in research that this company is trying to get over here by using VR and XR to actually look at, okay, yeah, but where do your eyes really go when we're actually posing things in front of you? And so eBay's just come out with the world's first virtual reality department store. Think about the shopping experience. Limited variety, not personalized for me. Never mind some of the poor shelfograms or whatever in your store. They partnered up with a company out of Australia, Myer. They've got 12,000 products. How do you surf through 12,000 products in a grocery store? You can't. And so by using AI and some smart VR, you can actually tour through a store, in my mind, perhaps better than the real shopping experience. So those were some examples going back to immersive media in terms of some interesting use cases that give some pause for consideration in terms of how does a new reality change your current reality. Rob, you wanted to go deep on some sensors. And before I do that, just to level set for everybody, we're going to try to go to about 15, 20 minutes after the hour. And please add some use cases. At the end of this, we're going to ask you to become part of our group of people that may take some of this stuff forward. So Rob, sensors and IoT, and you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Sean. It's to the earlier point of how things are overlap. I think that anytime you pick an area, you realize that they're really connected to other areas. So I tried to take a really specific look at sensors as modeled by the simpler things with a little bit less technology, but and then look at how they're intermediating things. If you look back 10, 15, 20 years ago about what a computer did, most computers were attached to a human to collect information a certain way to the physical world. So how I see sensors is an ability to disintermediate different collection factors to speed up the movement of going from the real world into a computing world or a digital world. And that's the real innovation in a broad look, is that, hey, if there's sensors out there, we don't need to have other people collecting things in analog, converting them and putting them into machines to spit out other things that we've got to do real things for. Sensors are kind of amazing. They're a superhuman characteristic. Our brain is a brain, and maybe it's like a computer, but it's surrounded by these amazing sensors. If you could flip a slide for me, Sean. So our brain, and this one's, it's sort of impossible to think of. I don't know which came first, the senses or the brain. I think that it runs in some kind of quantum fashion, that they're interrelated to each other. And there's a set of scientists who believe that AI, back to AI, connecting to sensors, is that one of the techniques to get to general AI would be to build a very, very simple brain that can process good memory, short-term, long-term, and traumatic memory, all three memories, and then really wickedly good sensors, and then let loose a very basic algorithm to learn. And that general computer is probably in place right now and probably growing in complexity. So when I think about sensors, I think that, again, back with AI and riffing on AI a little bit, when you look at deep learning and machine learning, its innovations were a computer scientist sitting beside a neurologist and saying, okay, how does it work again, doc? Over and over again. I remember in 2016, to get a job at DeepMind in machine learning, you had to be a statistician, neuroscientist, and a computer scientist. Just so rare, which is why in 2016 things were taking so long. And then the first part, if you look at the human brain, our brain is dedicated to visual. So a lot of the early ideas of how the brain worked were just in visual examples. So that's why we ended up with machine learning doing classification first, then generalized, but that's the eyes. So my big question now is, in sensors, well, what about smell? What about hearing? What about taste? What about touch? I'm not going to talk about touch very much. I'll start with that one. In any robot that's built out, if you add touch to it, it's a better robot. It's a robot that most probably won't break the boxes it's moving around, and it won't kill the human beside it if there's touch. If there is no touch, if there's no feedback loop, there really isn't any full smarter machine. So in the broader model, if I put sensors at the center of things and look at how they're connected or interconnected to things, I know that when you think of sensors, you may go to, well, they're just IoT devices. Well, there are some IoT devices that only just route bits and communication layers. They're not really part of a new sense. They just route things. So the edge computing, I think IoT is really, really general. It does a lot of things, and it has sensors. Some are very specific, like a Nest or a Ring doorbell. That's an IoT edge thing, and it's a sensor, and it's hard to separate. But other IoT things are less so. Mobile devices are related. Intelligent agents are related, which are a little bit different than AI. Big data, there's a edge level sort of one, like what's one smell? That idea of a sensor that is so specific that it can find out what a strawberry smells like. Big data would be assembling all of that, and it changes the idea of what it is. If you could smell everything in a store or everything in a factory, or like you do in your car every day, if you've got a burning electrical device in your car and you've ever grown up at a farm or you've been around cars a lot, you know that smell like this when circuitry is burning. Imagine if those sensors would smell like that, and then imagine if the sensor network could collect all those smells and do that across Canada or across the Philippines. You'd have a different brain around sensors, but they're very important, and that leads, of course, to massive computing and then the different kinds of computing, whether it's just processing digital or some fascinating things with predictive and quantum computing.
So the weather channel or weather network would have like a smell rating for the day, Rob. Is this possible in the future?
I think it's coming. Just like UV, though, it's going to be SV, Sean. The smell value of the day would be like if you're running on Thursday in Manhattan and you're up in the 50s and the garbage is on the street, you may get that little ding to go left to avoid those trucks. So I got to pick some use cases. And what I did with the Cypher lens is I took the use case, I started with the use case, and I sort of doodled around, well, what would go on with this? So I started with listening. There's a project there's a project called the Pegasus Project, which is based on Pegasus technology from a company in Israel called NSO. And they've been listening to messages. And so part of their sensors are just collecting digital messages, but they also listen to voicemail in that package. So the practice in Cypher model is that, hey, people can listen to things, and that's to cover security. And the hack is one small company has delivered something that people are using broadly, and now it's bumping into the contradiction. Can you have this listening across a network of messages and not contradict privacy and free speech? Where's the balance in this? So in rolling out the sensors are there, but the contradiction is quite clear, and it splashed in the news in large. It's so that I think this type of technology, unfortunately, will become buried. It's so risky until the laws change about it. But it's, I think it's like, it should be treated like military grade secrets, not anything else. You can flip slide. So speaking of listening, this is more analog to appropriate. The unfortunate name of ShotSpotters, which is an American company that has rolled out technology that listens to gunshots. And it's controversial because it rolled out very quickly. It's a type of thing where the practice of policing and managing security again, rolled out listeners, raw listeners, that the idea is just listen for a gunshot and then be able to report on that gunshot faster than humans can to handle the problem. So right now the rarity is gunshots don't happen in most cities that often, other than Chicago in the US and Winnipeg in Canada, the biggest gunshot capitals of each of the countries. But thinking outside the box a little bit, but extremely, what could you do if it's beyond gunshots? Could you listen to a whole city and get its patterns and just start looking what the negative things are and the positive things are, so that if you've got you can measure the emotion of a city. Like I'm sensitive to this now and listening to sports where they removed the crowd sounds. Well, that was cool and interesting because it was still real. But then when they added the fake sounds, those fake sounds, even though they got better, they put me to sleep. There is a pattern in them that just is tiring. So I really realized the pattern when the live fans came back. So my hypothesis here is if you could listen just instead of gunshots, but listen to the happiness of your city now, you could do it with the same network. And this one is, I hope it happens. And again, it's neutral technology that can be used for good or evil, but I'm sensing that listening to your city and having sound maps of your city or something like an MRI of your whole city collected together is something that will evolve from this early technology. In the meantime, back into the central figure, as it rolls out, to Howard's point, some negative things. In Chicago, they had rolled out this technology. There's some police that were responding to a crime where they, based on what they heard, and unfortunately they shot an innocent victim. So the shot fired, it's not accurate enough, other than, and they overused the accuracy or assumed it was accurate, and it's not. So I expect that this just like cameras in London, it'll be rolled out before we know it, and it'll be a common practice. And I hope that it's transparent as it rolls out, and then open source, everyone can use it.
Hey, Rob, not to do a rap kind of comment, but if I remember correctly, the finale of the TV show Person of Interest demonstrated the coordination of sound and visual, right? To get somebody out of a jam. This was, God, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago already, but yeah.
There actually was a full-length movie about this particular technology. I can't remember the name of it.
Huh. And Daniel, you had raised your hand. Was it on that, or was it on?
I was going to say that I recently interviewed a student who built an app very similar. You were talking about listening, where the idea was that you would crowdsource this application that would listen to people on your phone, and he had artificial intelligence that would recognize when someone was in danger. And what it would do is it would send out blast messages to everyone that was in the vicinity to help.
So interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess as well to the point Rob's making here, a potential miss factor as well. Like if you were play acting something out that might be misinterpreted as well. But yeah, so interesting. All right, Rob, where to next? Smell again.
Well, the smells, because smells matter, Sean. Intel Inside, new innovation. Now this one isn't rolled out yet, but I've been very fascinated again by all the senses and how they could apply to different possibilities. So the Intel lab has something that I call the Mammalian olfactory bulb. So this is a model of digitalization of how your nose works, and it can separate smells, just like the GAN's algorithm in machine learning can separate picture. So that visually, this is old news that an AI can look at a picture and say, there's Rob in a Hawaiian shirt, there's Sean in his blue shirt, and Augustine is a picture, and knows how to do that now. They're doing the same thing now with smells. So I was just ideating, like, if you had a smell technology, what could you do with it? Now I know a couple things in psychology in that if someone is in a state of fear, they do, and it is proven they exude different smells. So you can smell fear. And then there are pheromones. We know that based on 18th century science that pheromones work. It was studies of ants that proved that they were smelling their way through trails. And if you affect those trails of smelling objects, they lost where they were. So pheromones are a thing that are measured, and people do experience with them now. This could scale out and you could smell and experience. There was a very fascinating podcast episode about a scientist, a pair of scientists, a nurse and her husband, where she realized that she was a super smeller, so a superhuman smeller. So for instance, a dog, women smell 2 and 3 times more in detail than men do in general. Dogs smell 100 to 120 times better than humans do. So superhuman, super dog is a really special power. In this special experiment, she realized that her husband had Parkinson's based on the way his smell changed. She connected the dots when he was progressing, and he realized that she was smelling different. And she was on his case about it. When they went to get some therapy and she was in a room, she realized that all the men in the room smelled the same way her husband did. Now the happenstance is that they happened to be a medical scientist, and she was a nurse. So they did a study about applications and adding smelling back into medicine in a formal way. What was missing when I heard this position was there wasn't digital technology that could be objective about it.
Well, I was going to say on this one, Rob, you went all serious on me. I was going to say that every university dorm room should have this technology, and then you said something that had real societal use. So, congrats.
I'll back it up to the potty, because when I was doing the Cypher method of what's the practice, I picked sanitation as a practice, and then an extreme condition, if this works well, is to roll it out to all public bathrooms. So instead of having a list and inefficiently checking on bathrooms, the hack would be build the app and just fix the smelly ones.
Or signal to a customer, it's like, don't go in here yet. We're not ready for you.
So Dan, my friend Dan, this is literally a ripe area to apply technology to execute. I would want to be on a high-end one, a Lux, so to pay for this. So instead of doing a moonshot, how about rolling out the smell sensors to all the cheese factories around the world, so you could give aficionados a sense of where the cheese is smelling at, and who cut the cheese maybe. But that idea.
Hey, can you smell Teen Spirit?
Back to pheromones. Pheromones.
I believe the book was called "Who Stole My Cheese," not "Who Smelled My Cheese." All right.
There was, I remember in the 60s, there was smell-o-vision. If someone look up on the internet, smell-o-vision, they were trying to match just like you would VR or rumble seats with smells, and they were spraying smells. So I think that given the digital smelling input, there's going to be a digital creation of chemical smelling experience. And by retail, I know that if something smells like citrus, you buy 10 to 15% more of whatever you're buying in any fashion store. All right, so go ahead. Any comments on smells and distribution? I got one last one.
I'll just offer one other thought here. I bet you international fragrances, whatever the company name is that does all the fragrance stuff, I gotta believe they're working on this, because the cost reduction for them of being able to digitally do it would just be phenomenal.
When I think that it's Intel working on this, Howard, I know it's going in your phone. I know it's one of those chips, just like the little FM chip in all the phones. There's an FM radio in every phone that's legislated either working or not. It's going to just be in all IoT devices because it's such a generic sensor, and it's the oldest sense humans have. It's probably the least studied area in AI right now, and compared to the other senses. But I'm very excited about the smelly stuff.
Rob, there was a lot of studies done in the early 90s with fragrance and odors, specifically for fighter pilots.
Okay.
It helped them be more productive and more alert.
Got it.
And my partner used to work for Firmenich, a Swiss flavor and fragrance company. So they are doing it. They are like several years ahead, and they had a digital lab. So we're talking about branding smells for businesses, stuff like that. So they were doing that. And the formula these days, it took them used to take them 2 to 3 months to formulate a smell. These days, it's much faster.
That's wild. It's amazing. And that reminds me, Jennifer, that new car smell, that famous new car smell, is smell in a bottle. It is. There's no longer new car smell. That is engineered, like you're saying, that someone thinks of it and they're able to do it. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And these days, digital platforms, because that's why they wanted to do an incubation themselves, because open digital platforms, consumers can do it yourself. Like you can do it faster.
Yeah, this I think that all that science is going to become very low cost.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to my Raspberry Pi smell sensor.
The Raspberry Pi smelling Raspberry Pi. I love it.
So the last one I've got for us is the Big Bang, I guess, a multi-sensor. There's a couple hundred sensors in Teslas. So I'm not thinking about the driver car here. I'm thinking about the network of cars. Tesla has managed to have the largest database of mapped roads, digital mapped roads, and experience of cars on roads on the planet. I think that data is a Nobel Prize winning set of data of motion, traffic, heat, light, everything is collected. So the practice is safety. And early on, when the Teslas were in beta, Musk announced that they would come out of beta when they proved that we're 10 times safer than any other car. This last year, they've kind of hit that mode where they are the safest cars by data. So there's a time coming now in within 5 or 10 years where basically any way else of making a car will be negligent. Cars will have to be a network. They'll have to deal with data. They'll have to collect all that data, because it just will not be reasonable to a court of law that you've done a good job. You've given someone a dangerous instrument if it doesn't work this way. So an extreme case of this, that's a beautiful thing, and that the 39,000 people a year that die in car accidents in the US won't. This is a new asset, and it belongs to a private company. So back to Black Mirror, I wonder what will be done when some bad thing happens and someone makes a phone call to ask Tesla for all the data so that the Homeland Security could be protected. This happened. I was in a company where we're a data mining company, and we were being briefed on the OnStar database, where they were in operation for 1 year before they first got their first requests from the courts for the data to find out who was where with who. And I'm sure that's happening now. We'll hear it more often, but it's an amazing result. A moving, multi-pronged network of multi-sensors that is dynamic, and it unrolled in the world in 5 years. It makes the car itself look like a Tonka toy.
Traffic for good or traffic for bad, Rob, right? Like depending on who is behind it. So interesting. Nathan, before we move on to the last topic, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I just at the thought of expecting all cars to be sensor laden and networked and smart as a responsibility, I can't help but tag that into the cybersecurity theme, because that's the thing. You know, these devices that we don't think of as computers, that have more computers than the office computers, that security is an afterthought. It's hard to do. It's really hard to maintain. You know, there was already researchers demonstrated taking control of a Jeep driving down the street to control away from the driver. Boy, the smarter you want to make things, and especially moving things that can kill people, the more you better be taking that cybersecurity theme really seriously.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Comment.
Yep.
Just merging really quickly into the last thing, because there will be a tout for all of you on this, where I think we can build something very interesting with not a lot of time. A lot of times we get ambitious. I think there's something on the back end of this webcast I'd love to introduce to you. So I'm talking the Internet of Things, and I think, Rob, you've touched on it with sensors. Just the legality of all of this will be very interesting over the next 5 to 10 years as well. I will give you a stat that I read, which was really profound when I thought about it. The average automobile collision damage claim, like big one, is $16,000. All right, that's a lot of money. The average product liability suit is $748,000. So do you want to sue the other person in the other car that crashed into you, or the Tesla who is behind it that may have a product liability issue on their hands? I think we will be sampling this issue over and over again over the next 5 to 10 years, as some of us are in self-driving cars and some of us aren't.
Right.
I see Barry in the back of my mind right now, Rob, who always jumps on these calls going, "You're crazy to think autonomous cars are going to be around for the next 20 or 30 years. I'll be dead by then." And I told Barry the other day, well, I think you'll be alive, which either means you're going to be really old or it's going to happen quicker than we think. Here's a Mercedes-Benz thing that I've seen various prototypes. You know, we don't need a steering wheel anymore when autonomous cars happen. We don't need a ton of space that is delivered to the actual experience of, you know, requiring to drive it. And so, you know, will we see a world where we actually live in cars? We're having a tough enough time with housing prices. You know, does your Airstream become your moving home where you just live in there all the time too? So a number of different use cases, situations where autonomous cars allows you to work remotely wherever you want and not have to be in a hotel, because you can live in your car now if you design it that way. I love Carbon Robotics and what they've done here. They've got a de-weeding machine that can take out weeds on 20 different acres every single day. And when you look at a farm, more than 30% of a farm's cost is associated with both labor, which if they're taking out the weeds, and a whole bunch of very damaging pollutants that go into the environment that you know, Monsanto or somebody really wants them to buy. And so this now takes that away through autonomous vehicles. You've probably seen this as well. A bit scary, but at the same time, if we're losing a whole bunch of waves of bees, who are going to transplant all these flowers and things that we totally need for a food system, potentially robo bees in the future? And so those are some of my autonomous things. I know drones I find completely interesting. I think the notion that we'll probably be delivering to houses drones mail over the next decade is a complete and utter reality. I think we've seen over the pandemic our acceptance of these things invading our lives. So my hope is we've teased some of you in terms of two things. One, this Cypher model being a really interesting lens in terms of looking at early signals into the future, and also just some really interesting use cases, albeit only on 6 technologies. So in the last 4 minutes we have, and we can do some after hours after that, here's an enticement. I think we're a smart group of people that kind of are well-read, see the world. I would love to have a group of people maybe meet once or twice and develop the most interesting use cases on the biggest emerging technologies. And so if you're interested in being part of this hard scrabble crew of people that understand a little bit about tech and a lot about how that may make sense in our world, just put your name in the the chat and just have Tech Swans beside your name, and I will make sure that you are on this roster of people that get together for maybe a couple of different smart brainstorms across the 24-hour clock, so we include the entire world. A couple other things. Our next Atelier, and Daniel, I'm going to get to you in a minute. Just first raise hand. There may be others. Future of Work, it's coming up in 2 weeks. So Friday, 10 a.m., August 13th is our Atelier 5. The number one thing that you have told us will be the lasting remnant of the pandemic is the future of work and how it's all going to change. We're going to talk about it in a couple weeks with some other faces. We do have a weather vane survey. It's our 4th one that we've done as a guild. This one is really, really topical as people talk about re-entry anxiety and the new normal or the next normal, and whether Delta and Gamma and Epsilon are going to take us or delay us out of that. Please, if you have a chance, and Rob, I don't know if you've got the link, but if you could throw the link in, I'm a little bit, or maybe not, but it is at GSG Weather Vane 4 at Bitly. And then finally, we jump on Clubhouse every single Sunday for the last 28 weeks. It's not all of us all the time, but it's always an interesting conversation like we've had today, a little bit more informal. We talk about Howard's music, we talk about Rob's fashion, and we tend to get at the Grey Swan news wrap that we publish.
We're going to do a special this weekend on rocket shapes, Sean. Make you blush.
Rocket shapes. So that will be a extraordinarily, yeah, I won't go there. This is a public recording. So Daniel, I promised to get back to you. You had your hand raised.
I'm sorry, I don't have access to chat where I work. They block it. So I'd like to be included.
I am putting your name in chat. Like this is ordinarily all of the use cases that we just talked about, they would already accommodate for your need, but unfortunately we're doing it old school. So so thank you, Daniel. In the time that we have left, I mean, we were planning on going to around 5:20, but it's a little bit past it. So I guess technically we're in the after hours. I will stop recording outside of the fact. To the recorded audience, please join us again for our future ateliers. And if you're coming to us new, please join us at greyswanguild.org and join us formally as we engage in both events and different types of reports and different types of productions that we will do in the future. I'll stop recording now, and then